Hello, and welcome to Real Menopause Talk. My guest today is Matilda Gill, a film producer and mother of 2 teenagers. She went through early menopause at the age of just 36. Today, she shares with us her experience, why this was actually positive for her, and how awareness is crucial. Matilda.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
I'm fine.
Lovely to meet you, and thank you so much for giving your time for this.
It's a pleasure.
I would love to hear a little bit about your background.
Okay, so I am 48. I have 2 kids. I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son about to be 15. What else do you need to know about me? I'm a film producer. I make online short films. I'm freelance and I'm married, and that's about it.
How did you get into being film producer?
I worked in TV. So I did a degree actually in classics, in Latin and Greek, and then went on and got into the world of TV gradually and went through a charity that makes films about the environment. And that was my kind of launch pad, where I happened to meet my husband as well. And then I went off into Channel 4 and BBC and did bigger documentaries. And then after I had my kids, I didn't want to work full time, and I didn't want to have a job that I had to, the TV industry is quite unforgiving to older women.
Yes.
So even when I was in my 20s, I used to look at these women who now to me would be really like basically my age, and think I don't want to be that age and having to wear a leather miniskirt. I want to be able to grow old in a dignified way. And it's so funny what you construed as old. Obviously, I'm not old now, but I thought I was old. And so I didn't want to stick in that industry. And so I went off and have ended up making lots and lots of films, as I said, for everybody from the UN to big environmental agencies to tiny companies, mainly about renewable energy, sustainable energy, human rights development, but also a few historical stuff. And I own my own company, which I've been doing with Rob since 2012, but I'm now having a midlife crisis about it's not enough work. I hate being freelance. I basically want someone else to take all the grief and go and work for them. You've got me at a weird phase, to be honest. I'm just slightly having a wobble about everything. But I was saying to my friend who I saw yesterday, I think our parents' generation, they all had their midlife crisis when they were about 40. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's when it was going to happen. And so we were kind of all prepped but our children were so much younger than we had been. So like my mum, when she was 40, her kids were kind of late teens. Now we're all so much older, and it's like, oh, now's the midlife crisis. So
yes,
I'm looking around and seeing all my friends kind of approaching 50, coming out slightly the other side of 50, and all having a, oh my God, what am I doing moment about everything. So
the other way of looking at it, which is what I have been trying to do through the hormonal fluctuations and the mental crisis of this isn't enough, what am I doing, what have I done, it's all over, it's too late, is we have another opportunity as our children are getting older.
I feel I'm kind of, as I said, I'm very much coming out the other side, and I just think if I'm not careful, I'm going to be applying for colleges along with my daughter. Do you know what I mean? And kind of she's looking at universities and I'm like, oh, I'm so jealous, I want to go and do it. And my husband said, I'm just waiting for you to announce you're about to do another degree. And I'm like, we'll see.
So along with midlife crisis of existential proportions and reality, whereabouts are you on your menopause journey?
Dudley, my son, was born 14 years, just nearly 15 years ago. I never got my periods back after I had him. And I had always been quite unreliable on my periods. It was never stable. I never was regular. And it meant that with both my children, I ended up having to go and have dating scans. So that explains how disorganized I was. I never had a clue. With Flo, I didn't know I was pregnant. With Dudley, I thought I might be. But I had absolutely no idea when he'd been conceived. Does that make sense? Because my periods were so irregular. Mm-hmm. So when my periods didn't come back, I thought, oh, well, that's nice. I'd never had heavy periods anyway. It had never been a big problem. I'd never been ready for them when they'd come. And what I kind of realized as well of another thing that struck me as odd was I had been incredibly broody before I had children. Then I had my children. I didn't want to have any more children. I knew I didn't, but I was terrified that my hormones were going to tell me I did. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of wary of that, thinking, oh my God, am I going to have 10 years of looking at babies and longing to have babies? And basically that never happened either. And so after a couple of years, and I thought, well, that's weird, no period. So went to the doctor and he said, oh, well, could be things, didn't really do anything about it. Mm-hmm. Maybe we should do some blood tests, come back in a while, So I came back, and in the end, I think I was probably about 35 to 36 when I had a blood test done, and they checked my FSH levels. And basically the levels meant they were low or high or whatever it meant. I was getting there, but I wasn't there. And so my doctor was saying, do you have hot sweats? No. Do you do this? No. Are you very grumpy? Well, yes, because I've got small children, but I don't think, probably not unreasonably so. He said, okay, go away and come back if you think you're experiencing any more symptoms, or come back in a year, come back in a year if you're still not having your period. So I think I first of all came back, no period. They checked them again, still not quite there, but obviously there's something going on. Within the next 6 months, so I was 36 coming on to 37, and I realized I was sitting in a meeting with two women who were kind of 48 and 53, and I was having hot sweats. So weird. And I thought, this is what it is. And I was having other very odd moments of hot sweats. But I remember just that irony of thinking, God, I'm so young. These two women should be doing it, not me. There's no record in my family of people having early menopause at that stage. So it just felt a bit odd. But I then went back and was feeling by this stage, I think a bit low, but I had also suffered slightly with depression after having Dudley when things had been really tough. So when he'd been 2, so I was 35, I was put on Prozac for 6 months. So part of it was also trying to read my mental health and everything else. I came off the Prozac after 6 months. It was very much triggered by real life. It was about neither of us having any work, neither of us no income, etc. It was serious anxiety, stress. That was why I was put onto it to manage it. Got myself back into work. And then this started kicking in, and I thought, okay, I don't know what menopause. I don't know if I'm menopausal, but then the hot sweat seemed to kind of nail it for me. And I thought, well, must be. Mm-hmm. My FSH levels were high. And then by 37, I went back in and I said, okay, and I've done another blood test. And he said, right. And then he looked at my results and he said, right, you have to go on to HRT. And I was like, oh, okay. And you're going to be on it for 13 years, at least. So we believe people should stay on HRT until they're 50. That's the current level of thinking. And I mean, I can't remember if it was that appointment or my next appointment, but he basically, having generally been a fairly supportive GP, was just turned around and said, I said, I really don't know if I want to do it. And he said, well, if you don't, you're going to dry up, your bones are going to go brittle, you're going to feel rubbish. And I got this kind of whole thing. He said, just take it. And I was like, okay. Kind of had this slightly odd, slight bullying thing right at the end to go on to HRT. And he prescribed the one which had progesterone pills and estrogen pills. And I had to kind of time the whole thing. And he said, you'll take these and your periods will start again. Now, bearing in mind, I hadn't had periods for probably 4 years by this stage, longer with pregnancy, 5 years. I just thought, I really do not want periods again. I had never particularly enjoyed periods in the first place. I was never one of those people who they were reassuringly regular and made me feel well. So I started taking it. And then I thought, I hate this. I really don't want to be taking pills either for the rest of the next 13 years. It was quite odd, me going through an early menopause. As I said, there was no one in my family who'd done it. So then I have 2 older sisters, one who's 5 years older, one who's 4 years older. Neither of them had talked about menopause, and I knew neither of them were menopausal or thought they were menopausal. The one who's 5 years older is a GP, and she had had a Mirena coil for the last 7-8 years. She suddenly said, oh, God, well, if you're menopausal, maybe I am too. So she went off and had her levels measured, and it turned out she was menopausal. So she was 42. The 41-year-old had just decided she wanted to have children. and was really struggling to have children and didn't know why. And then, of course, it turns out she is also perimenopausal, menopausal, and ended up having to have egg donation. So all three of us, 3 out of 3, early menopause. I don't know when my sisters kicked it, but I got it definitely. By the time I was 36, 37, it was done. The GP suddenly got interested because it was her body as well. So she went to a conference and came and said, I've read up on it. I've looked around. I don't think we should be on pills. What we're going to do is we're all going to have coils put in and we're going to rub estrogel into our arms. This is the way the French do it. It's much better. It lowers the risk of other dangers around it. And I psychologically just felt it was far less intrusive. Mm-hmm. I'd never had a coil until then for contraceptive reasons. So I then had a coil put in and that was horrific. And every time it goes in, it's horrific. Every 4 or 5 years, there seems to be disagreement each time how long it'll last, but I know officially it's 4 years. But since then, I've been on the coil and estrogen as a balance, and it's completely worked. And really, from the age of 37, I've kind of felt it's fine. It's just part of what I do. It goes on with the deodorant in the morning, and it's just part of life. And I've never really questioned it. I think that the doctor dealt with it badly at the time, but he did say to me, I don't think you're going to question this at all once you started doing it. And he was right to the extent that quite a lot of my anxieties and mental things did ease off. I've never upped my dose. I'm on the minimum dose. It just solidly goes through. And the other kind of there's been little reassuring moments where like I went to see a chest consultant who isn't necessarily someone who talks about women's health. I have another weird genetic blip. And so I had to go and see her. And she was more interested in the woman's health, but active than she was in my weird genetic blip. And she said, I'm really glad you're doing exercise. I'm glad you're doing this. Make sure you get enough calcium. I'm glad you're on HRT. And she reassured me. And so I thought, okay, this is the right thing to do. So that was probably about when I'd been on it about 4 years. And the other thing I had to do because of my weird genetic blip was go and see a consultant gynecologist. Basically, my blip, it's so rare, they don't know what it does to people. So everything got checked out. And the gynecologist said, there's nothing with your genes that makes me worry about you. I had an ovarian cyst, a borderline ovarian cyst when I was 21. And he said, I can see that you're menopausal. So how would you feel about having your ovaries out just to remove that? Age 38, 39. But when I was 21, I'd had the cyst. Mm-hmm. So he could see on my notes and he just said, do you want to have your ovaries out? They're not doing anything now. They've stopped. And I said, well, and of course he couldn't tell me to do it because they can never tell you to do anything. And I said, well, what would you tell your wife to do? And he said, I'd tell her to have her ovaries out. So I said, okay, so I've had my ovaries out. And I felt reassured by people at the right time that I was taking HRT. No one's questioned it. I've always been on it and I felt I was in a different place from everyone else, put it like that. At the beginning, I felt different from everyone and I felt a bit odd. And I thought, is this something I should be embarrassed about? Being 36, 37, going through the menopause. And I think that lasted probably about a week. And then I thought, no, what's the point? It's just a weird blip. It's like having something else. It's like having the ovarian cyst. It's something else to do with my body. Aren't I lucky? I had my 2 kids. Aren't I lucky? I didn't actually want any more. I feel for my sister who didn't get her kids in time, but hey, she's got twins now. So I think that was all really fine. In the last 2-3 years, it's kind of coming up again and again because suddenly everyone else has caught up with me. So suddenly all my friends are interested in it, talking about it. And some talk to me about it, some don't. Some people wouldn't necessarily know I'd gone through it. Mm-hmm. What's weird is people's husbands now not come to me one-on-one, but if the women are around, they'll kind of quite happily talk about it. No one ever sees it as something that they couldn't talk to me about. That's absolutely fine. And I don't feel I have the answers, but I feel I'm very happy to say, just go and sort it out, go and see someone, do this. And when you've done it, what you need is the coil and the gel, and that works really well. People have done it. I know that other friends have done that and said, this is what I want to do. I'm amazed, just as I am with people with their very, very, very heavy periods that they seem to get when they're perimenopausal, how much people take before they go and see a doctor or do anything about it. But then I feel, again, it's very, very removed from me, having not had a period for 15 years. it's delightful not having periods, and I feel for my daughter having them. The other weird blip I've had, so I got a call from my GP in December saying, you've asked for more estrogel. We've just looked and seen that your coil ran out over a year ago. And I was like, why has no one told me? And they said, we don't do that for coils. You should have put it in your diary. And I said, what, 4 years ago? And they said, yes. And I was thinking, 4 years ago, I definitely didn't have an iPhone that worked. So I'm not sure how I would have done that. Oh, do you not carry the card? Well, no, not for 4 years. It was the first time I felt a wobble and vulnerable. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've got a coil in there. And I'd never really taken the time to understand what the progesterone does and the estrogen does. So the pharmacist phoned me and she explained, and she said, we cannot give you estrogen until you take a form of progesterone because it's too dangerous. So I said, okay, fine. What do I do? And they said, go and try and find a clinic now. So this was, as you can imagine, at Christmas now in January, with everything shutting down, it was impossible. I spoke to, and I happened to get through to an amazing clinic where a consultant gynecologist answered the phone because they were so understaffed. And she said, well, actually, I'm the consultant. I just don't have any staff to take this call. So I will explain to you, you're going to be fine. This is what you're going to do. I can't replace your coil because we're not doing any one, but go and ask for patches. You're fine with the coil. It'll last for another, I don't know, I think you can have 10 years before it starts doing damage. Go and take progesterone in another form and estrogen until you can get a coil replaced. And I was like, okay. So then I went back to my GP and they prescribed patches. They were about to try and give me the ones that gave me periods again. Thank God I saw that coming. And thank goodness I'd also spoken to the consultant who had said, these are the ones you need. Because she said, right, before, you'll need to know. And I can't remember the terms, but basically one gives you periods and one doesn't. And she said, you don't need the ones that give you periods. The GP said, I don't know if I could. I said, oh, I know this. The consultant told me I don't need periods. So then I had sticky plasters on my bum for 5 months until I could get the proper coil put back in. And now I'm back on the one I like. The patches were hideous and they did make me feel wobbly for a bit, and I think affected me slightly mentally. Just didn't like it, but I think the whole thing made me feel oddly vulnerable again, because I'd been kind of totally in control until this winter. I mean, as far as my menopause went, I thought also I may have come through the other side. Maybe I'm fine and maybe I don't need any of this. But actually, who knows? Because I was probably still getting bits of progesterone. I was definitely still on estrogel. I never came off it completely, but when I changed the method, it did make me feel a bit weird. And then going back onto it psychologically feels completely the right place to be. Going back to my routine. So I've officially got another 2 years. My GP said we can look at this maybe when you're 50. Maybe we'll wait till your coil runs out and then think about taking you off it. And I have a slight, I don't know, I may be one of those people who doesn't come off it. I don't know. We'll see.
Just to hear what you've experienced is phenomenal. And to me, it sounds rare and unusual, but I bet there are other women out there who may have had similar experience. And so knowing that there's someone else is in itself reassuring.
There's an increase in early menopause. I know this because when it happened to me, my mother kind of slightly freaked about it. So she, of course, asked all her, all her friends, asked the doctor, everything. And it's one of those things that can be linked to stress. They've tried to find triggers that set off the early menopause. But what was reassuring to me in a way was that my 2 sisters went as well, which implies it was nothing to do with me. It's definitely genetic, but it's definitely not my mother's side. And then the hard thing is, well, not that my father would probably have known anyway. My father's died now. I've tried to go back through his line, so he's got a lovely first cousin she went through her menopause when she was in her 50s. So she said, it's definitely not my line, because it hit all 3 of us. I feel like it must have been quite strong.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if it was my dad's mother's line, where actually they have all died now, the women who have kind of gone through that line, and they all had sons. So I'll never know if that's what it was. And actually, maybe these women in the 1940s, were going through it when they were in their late 30s. But again, they probably had their children in their 20s, so it didn't matter. problem now is if it is that strongly genetic, and my sisters and I have discussed this, is what do we say to our teenage daughters? Do we say, go and have babies now? I think my daughter does understand it now. I mean, she's 17, and I've not really sat down and had big, serious talks with her because it's just felt too early. But my niece is 20 as well, and we I think they've got to be made aware that when women talk about their biological clocks, most women think they've got till they're 40. I would count until you're 30 and then see what happens after that. I mean, I got pregnant very fast when I was 31, 30. And then again with Dudley, it happened pretty fast. So it wasn't a petering out, but it definitely was pretty soon after my mid-30s that it was gone.
It's the unpredictable nature of it that makes it so challenging. Awareness is going to be the key, particularly for your daughter and niece and the younger generation. It's such a big subject to think about when you're in your teens or 20s for most girls, but it is something that we need to consider.
Yeah, and as I said, I think particularly if you're different from everyone else, so everyone else thinks they've got this threshold. And as I said, it's my poor middle sister was the one who missed the boat in a way, but at least they know. Because the gene obviously hasn't been identified. We don't know what it is, and we don't know if either my niece or my daughter will be carrying whatever it is. But the odds are, I think they should count on it.
How has your husband been throughout all of this? And how do you feel that men's awareness is improving? I love the fact that your friends' husbands feel free to talk about it to you.
Rob's the son of a doctor and a nurse, and he's not been fazed by it and is completely supportive. I think there's a huge issue for women in their late 40s, early 50s, where they identify the menopause as getting old. And I have missed that. And actually, that's a real blessing. So I have never associated it with being old because I wasn't old. I was young. So, and I have often tried to say this to people who are having a crisis about it. So I remember having a conversation with a friend in the park, 6-7 years ago, and she's like, I just feel so old. And I said, but you're not old, and having the menopause doesn't make you old. Look at me. It doesn't make me old. It doesn't make you older, and it's not a marker of age. It's something that happens to women. And yes, it generally happens around a certain time, but it doesn't mean you're past it just because you've hit that. So that's a big advantage for me going through it early. And it's something I'd like to say to other women is try to disentangle those two thoughts. It's not connected to being old. It's not connected to age. It's just a process. But the other thing is that I think because of the age front, I think maybe a lot of women fight the symptoms and think, well, I can't be, so I'm not going to deal with it. And I'm not going to go and see a doctor, or I'm not going to deal with the fact I'm terribly angry and anxious and upset, or that I'm having hot sweats or I haven't slept for 3 years, because that will be a kind of reckoning, an admission that there's something going on. And I'm in denial about that. So I'm not going to go and see someone. And both Rob and I escaped that because I wasn't in denial about it. I kind of knew. I was almost interested more than anything else. I didn't seek medical advice because I was in pain. I didn't seek medical advice because I couldn't sleep. I sought medical advice because it felt odd. At that stage, I had my ovaries. I knew I'd had this slightly complicated background. It seemed sense to seek advice. I therefore got kind of managed all the way there. And then I was put on HRT at a stage which helped me manage it. So I've never had that crisis. And Rob hasn't had to deal with me having that crisis. So he's been fine about it. We'd had our kids. It's been one more, oh, she's got another weird medical thing wrong. That's okay. That's fine. And it's never had a stigma. I think word is stigma. It just doesn't have a stigma. It doesn't have a stigma here. And equally, I think Rob couldn't be less interested in other women having it because for him, it doesn't feel like a stigma. Whereas I think the men that are kind of more interested in talking to me about it probably have a much stronger sense of stigma. So I think it might help them to talk to me to say it doesn't mean your wife is old and past it. Look, I'm not praising myself, but I don't look old beyond my years and I am fit and healthy and everything else. It's fine. People assumed they could rather than coming up, is it okay? And it's like, oh, yeah, it's fine. But they generally didn't even ask, oh, what was it like and what did you do? And so it's an interesting one. And I think obviously men are hopefully becoming better and better informed. And I think if anything, Rob will probably as I say, be more likely to be dismissive, not because he doesn't realize other people are having problems, but because he's never seen me suffering firsthand. But when I had the blip in the winter and doing that, then he's very sympathetic because he knows that my hormones are all over the place and it's just not much fun. So he can relate to that.
What would be your one piece of advice to somebody who is struggling then?
I think my number one is don't associate it with age, because I think that is what stops people sometimes getting help. And I suppose it's about it's about identity. And if it's a problem with your identity, my advice is get over it. It doesn't identify you. It doesn't say who you are. It's something that your body is going through. I would also say don't be afraid of going to ask for advice and help. And I don't think everyone needs it. If people didn't know I was early, then they'd probably assume I haven't, if you see what I mean, because it's not, I don't walk around with a badge on. Not everyone needs HRT. I think my GP dealt with it in a very heavy-handed way. He is no longer my GP. He retired just after. I was angry about how he dealt with it, but actually I have no problem being on HRT, and I think it is the right thing for me. And I really don't want osteoporosis. It's not in my nature to have hot sweats in the night and think this is just part of life. I think I'm a firm believer in the medical system. So I would say, if you believe in medical help, go and see someone.
Is there any one last thing that you would like to add?
I would just say, remove the stigma from the age factor, and I think you will deal with a lot of the problems.
Having the menopause doesn't make you old will stick with me.
No
Thank you so much for all your time, Matilda.
Absolute pleasure.
Take care.
And you.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening today. And I hope you have as much of a positive takeaway from Matilda's story as I do. You can subscribe to our newsletter so you never miss an episode at realmenopausetalk.com or follow us on the podcast app. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.